Last year, I made a video entitled, Elden Ring is the start of gaming's next golden age, and the recent release of Baldur's Gate 3 got the wheels of my mind spinning again about the era of gaming that we find ourselves in. I was initially going to title this video, Baldur's Gate 3 Continues the Golden Age of Gaming, before IGN of all outlets poached that headline the very day after I started drafting this script. Similar to Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3 came out the gates swinging and launched to a smashing success that no one really anticipated. I myself had no hype for this game until it was out, and my friends raving was enough to convince me that I had to give it a try. And I was certainly not disappointed. Baldur's Gate 3 gave me everything promised on the tin and more. I became addicted to this game for the past month before I forced myself to take a break to focus on more important things like work, exercise, and, well, making more content for this very channel. And here we are now. The success of Baldur's Gate 3 from an objective standpoint, as well as my own personal enjoyment of it, has caused me to consider the debate that has been circulating the gaming community for going on a decade now, as far as I'm aware. That debate is around the question, is gaming dying? And perhaps to be more fair to both sides of this argument, a better way to articulate that question would be, is the experience of gaming as a whole getting better or worse? This is not a simple question to answer, and I think it merits discussion and not dismissal, regardless of where you fall on the scale. My name is Lemondrop, and let's talk about why I believe a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is just further proof that we are entering a renaissance of high-quality games. I think before one can simply list off a series of games that they think somehow prove or disprove the idea that we're entering a period of revitalization, it's important that we define our terms. When I use terms like Renaissance or Golden Age or even good game, I'm referring to the value that these games confer upon the customer for their payment. In fact, I think you could substitute any number of praises of a game for the simple term pro-consumer. For the modern era, this means abiding by a few rules, with potentially allowing flexibility in a few. First, and most obviously, a game should respect its player's wallet. No game sold at a cost should have an in-game cash shop. Ever. Even for just cosmetics. To me, this is non-negotiable. If you pay the cost of entry to a game, you should have full access to that game and nothing hidden behind another paywall. Ideally, even free-to-play games would not have microtransactions, but I understand that's a tall order, since something has to keep the lights on, and relying merely on players' goodwill to donate is not always a viable market strategy. Secondly, and more importantly, in order to be a pro-consumer game, the intent of the game should be to provide a high-quality experience rather than to exploit addictive tendencies, manipulating your psychology to get you to buy shiny things that you don't need, or use underhanded practices to charge more money than you really want to spend. They want to sell you a complete product rather than churn out half-baked products with a functional cash shop and a promise that the game will be good next season. There are a few other markers of pro-consumerism, like not requiring always online for games that are largely single-player experiences, or avoiding performance-taxing DRM measures, but those things are somewhat more optional than simply engaging in honest and forthright business. A game that treats its players fairly deserves the title of being a good game, and in my estimation, deserves to be a part of this renaissance. I'd like to briefly discuss what I believe the pattern for success going forward is going to look like. There's a problem with creating a good product in any industry, and that problem is funding. I would wager that millions of people globally regularly think to themselves, I could make a good video game if I had the resources. I personally have been keeping a log of game ideas that I would like to start making when I have the time. But as the adage goes, time is money, and not everyone has the luxury of being able to quit their day job and dive into full-time creation while still being financially stable. This is the driving factor behind what I call the indie problem. Many people say that the future of gaming is going to be the indie gaming scene. In fact, I personally said things like that to friends not that long ago. However, I think now it's somewhat more complicated. Creation of a product takes upfront sacrifice, and whereas it's a romantic ideal to pit the out-of-touch AAA megacorporations who buy and sell each other for billions of dollars yearly, against the bedroom dev team of 5 people who made a passion project that took off, there are undeniable financial realities at play. You are either lucky, a super genius, or had an incredibly well-planned dev cycle if your first publicly released game ever turns a profit. This indie problem is more than just about funding versus profit, though. Indie games have a distinct pattern, even if they're successful, of having 15 minutes of fame and then falling back into obscurity. When was the last time you heard someone ask you about playing Splitgate, for instance? That game was all the rage for a few months because it scratched an itch, until Halo Infinite replaced it, only then to dominate the discussion cycle with how disappointing it was. Similarly, whereas BattleBit maintains some degree of its player base, its trajectory is undeniably downward. However, this trend of a spike in popularity followed by a decline is actually the first key to the pattern of success. You may have a runaway hit that gets talked about for a month, but the important thing is not trying to milk that hit or catch the same lightning in a bottle, but to use the returns to make something new. This is somewhat akin to the process of content creation. Speaking of which, if you're enjoying this video, consider subscribing for more gaming discussion pieces in the future. The process of forging success while still being pro-consumer is going to just be how games were made back in the day. Good old-fashioned market capitalism. You make a product that people want, earn a profit from it, and use those profits to make your next product. This is the way that games like Baldur's Gate 3 get made. In case you don't believe me that this method of game making still is viable in the modern day, let's examine a few other cases. The critically acclaimed Witcher 3 could not have been made without The Witcher 1 being a product.
Won't know pleasure until you've had me.
Bye.
Followed by The Witcher 2, which improved graphics and told a more compelling story. These two somewhat middling products that still attempted to deliver something of quality offered the player an experience worth playing, and the profits they generated funded one of the best story-driven RPGs. Elden Ring, which in my estimation is the best open-world RPG of all time, and even if that seems hyperbolic to some, it is undeniably critically acclaimed, was born off the back of a continuous string of the more niche Soulsborne games. These prior entries surely turned out less profit than Elden Ring, and while cult hits that gradually became mainstreamed, Elden Ring was all but a household name. Looking now to the indie sphere, one can't help but note the rise of supergiant games. Bastion was a successful release by all metrics. It's one of my favorite indie games, and also the reason that I artificially deepen my voice in my videos. I'm kidding, this is my real voice. It took successive releases, funded by prior games, for Supergiant to strike gold with Hades, which overtook the player count of their previous games tenfold. I think you get the idea. The future of successful, pro-consumer games is going to be built off the back of smaller past successes. Baldur's Gate 3, of course, follows this pattern, with Larian developing the Divinity series over time before getting the license to Baldur's Gate. Not to get into the weeds too far, but the whole discourse around Baldur's Gate's depth that spiraled into AAA companies trying to defend half-functional products was originally started by an indie developer who didn't want to be compared to a company with years of experience and assets to draw upon. I want to be clear, no one expects a Baldur's Gate 3 or an Elden Ring or even a Hades on your first release. What customers want is that you make a game that respects them, and they will respect you. You might only get 15 minutes of fame now, But the question is not how long you're going to stretch that first spike, but what you're going to do to get your next hit. This pursuit of repeated success, wherein there's a building of rapport with your customer base and an aggregation of your own skills and assets, is what will set the gaming industry back on track and fuel its onward growth. Let's return to the question posed at the start of this video. Is gaming getting worse? I think it should be obvious from the tone of this video that my opinion is generally positive. I believe that the gaming industry is priming itself for a major revitalization of genuine artistic expression. But the fact that I can notice a resurgence of quality indicates that there is something wrong. There's something to compare that quality against. I would argue that these last two discussion Flashpoint games, Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate, were notable not because they were somehow entirely groundbreaking in their design philosophies, but because gamers had a prominent example of something to compare them against. In the case of Elden Ring, you could compare it to a host of uninspired, open world for the sake of being open world games, and notably, there was a lot of discussion of it in comparison to the other largest RPGs to come out that year, God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West. A lot of the comparison that took place, at least in the circles I run in, was around those games' disrespect for the player's intelligence, with Aloy or Mimir or Boy shouting out the solution to even the most trivial puzzles before the player even had a chance to solve them. Elden Ring's massive success was not because it's a flawless, perfect game, but because it was miles ahead of its competition. To this day, Elden Ring still has technical issues like stuttering, and some contentious game design like its reuse of bosses. Hey, I made a video about that. But the way Elden Ring's open world was full of useful secrets, and the way the game refused to hold your hand and drag you through its quests and puzzles, was refreshing to players who were bored of a stale game design by committee. Baldur's Gate, of course, was primed for the payment to value discussion by the highway robbery that was Diablo 4. And maybe even that discussion was primed by the ire of Destiny fans who revolted, briefly, against Bungie's EA-tier monetization schemes. The discussion of microtransactions and pre-order bonuses and seasonal content was already underway, and Baldur's Gate capitalized on that by promoting their game as respecting the player's wallet. One payment, one time for the full game, and nothing locked behind paywalls down the road. I think the point is made without further extrapolation. The reason that these major releases are getting such hype and praise is because there's undeniably a large section of gaming that is being corrupted. Whereas I believe gaming is getting better and not worse, it's also hard not to sympathize with the swaths of disaffected and disenchanted gamers who feel like their favorite genres or IPs are being ruined because, well, they are. This is in essence the law of entropy. Things fall apart if they're not properly maintained. Despite raking in revenue, AAA gaming is stagnating and collapsing. Long-running series are being run into the ground, and whole genres go neglected by these companies. But I believe we are not without hope. This stagnation makes the success of smaller but more competent and consumer-focused companies loom all the larger. As it is said, no king rules forever. And my friends, this new golden age is just getting started. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and share it with some friends who may have a more gloomy outlook on the future of gaming. As always, respectful discussion and disagreement is welcome in the comments, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm not just engagement farming when I say that. I actually do read every comment that comes through to try to understand a wider perspective and see how I can improve my content. If you'd like to support future gaming discussion pieces and reviews, you can leave a tip via the links in the description, or otherwise, a simple subscription would be fine as well. As always, thank you for watching, and long may the sun shine.